welcome to another episode of The Third Perspective. I'm your host, Rob. Tonight I have with me Byron.
Liberal libertarian.
So how are we doing tonight, Byron?
Sleepy.
It is kind of late, but we'll move forward. Tonight we want to talk about an interesting concept that is a major discussion point with liberals and conservatives. Liberals especially seem to believe that capitalism doesn't work, that we need socialism. Conservatives kind of believe that we have too much socialism in this country. So tonight we're going to analyze what we really have, which socialism and fascism versus capitalism. Start with the easy one, fascism. I'll go ahead and read this definition here. A political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. So basically, one person is in control, and they kind of control economic and social stratas, pretty much control everything from a centralized location. Any thoughts on that?
Often through the use of patriotism.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, over the past 12 plus years now, we've had patriotism crammed down our throats. I mean, if you didn't support the government, if you didn't support the troops, and I was a troop, how could I not support the troops?
I don't support myself.
Yeah, that's a wonderful one.
This might be a bit of a loopy episode, but yeah.
Just a little bit.
No, like, it's, I mean, not, how do I put this? It's not to say that it's like religion, not like trying to demonize religion, but they take it to that extreme fanaticism.
Yeah, like any fanaticism, fascism is the kind of control that goes down to the very lowest levels, that is controlled from one person at the top. So fascism, a modern day example of fascism would be North Korea. I mean, used to be Kim Jong-il, now it's Kim Jong-un, but they're in control.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll get into more later. That's socialism and fascism, or communism in the case of China and North Korea. I mean, what's the difference between fascism and socialism or communism? They always claim that somehow communism is better, but it always seems to end up being fascist.
Well, it is a scale thing. I mean, it will go up between, you might start off capitalist and then move up to socialism and then the communism and then fascism. That seems to be the way the thing branches off for the most part. So, I don't know, it's not too surprising if you really think about it.
We can kind of see the similarities and how they really are essentially the same things.
Yeah.
I mean, they all rely on control.
They don't rely on control, but, with socialism, they seem to focus more on...
Well, let's finish out fascism. We'll talk a little bit more about what I've got here, and then we'll move to socialism.
All right, that works.
As an economic system, fascism is socialism with a capitalist veneer, or a sort of facade. It just gives the impression thereof, which is how we can have that view that fascism is somehow on the right or the conservative side versus the left gets the socialism. But that's not entirely true. In its day, the 1920s and 1930s, fascism was seen as a happy medium between boom and bust prone liberal capitalism with its alleged class conflict, wasteful competition, and profit-oriented egoism, and revolutionary Marxism, which is communism, with its violent, socially divisive persecution and bourgeoisie, which is the middle class. Fascism substituted the particularity of nationalism and racialism, blood and soil, for the internationalism of both classical liberalism and Marxism. So that being kind of a melding, kind of stepping stone, as Marx always, in the later years of his life, Marx talked about socialism as a stepping stone to communism.
That's the way I understand it, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it seems very hard to keep things in a certain place. And by that, I mean, like, capitalism is kind of at one extreme end, fascism is kind of at the other extreme end, and then you have socialism and communism in the center. Although I guess you could say anarcho-capitalism is beyond that, but not beyond.
Anarcho-capitalism would be
On the
a
far side with
utopia kind
capitalism.
of
Yeah.
situation.
But, like, it's very hard to keep the balance. Most of the time, especially when it comes to governments, you'll usually find that it's like, if they can't stay in capitalism and they drift into socialism, socialism can very quickly become communism, and then that can very quickly move up to fascism just by who's there up in office.
Yeah, so what you're saying is it goes capitalism, socialism, communism, fascism.
Which is what I said before, but it's just like, it's very easy for that process to accelerate and go up to the next extreme.
Mm-hmm. As the main cornerstones of socialism, fascism, and communism, they tend, well, they are planned economies. Basically, central banks, central governments plan and try and control the economy to keep it from these massive boom and bust cycles. But it's a natural part of the marketplace that you always have boom and bust cycles.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically your business up and down, and isn't that just the normal cycle?
Yeah, I mean, you have cycles with everything. So you have your boom and bust cycle with a free marketplace. The problem is when you try and take control of that cycle, what you do is make things worse. And a lot of studies are starting to show that the New Deal and all these plans that came about during the Great Depression that everybody touts, oh, that got us out of the Great Depression. What it's actually starting to show is that it prolonged the Great Depression. It made it worse.
See, that's the thing, though. It's like, this could potentially stray into a completely different debate, but it basically comes down to, this is where people keep imposing their will upon something instead of letting the natural cycle occur and just hanging on for the ride. Instead, they always feel the need they have to control it, and they need to get it immediately back into the best situation possible instead of just riding out the bad situation and letting it go.
Well, see, that's the thing. Everybody, instead of letting market ebb and flow happen, we need to take control. We got to make changes. We got to do something now. And the problem is we make things worse when we do that, because when you take scarce resources away from what the market wants to what you want or what government perceives that people want, you screw up the natural flow, and it makes things worse. Because you as an individual know what you need and what you want more than government knows.
But see, it's not just that. It's just, I don't know why they have this unrealistic interpretation of, we can keep everything running at peak performance.
Well, that's born out of government's idea that they can control everything. I mean, any government in the history of man has tried to control the people. There hasn't been a point where they haven't tried to usurp more and more control and tell people how to live their lives.
I wouldn't
And
just.
that creates the social stratus.
That does, but I don't think it's just the government. It just seems to be general ignorance.
Well, it is still the government. I mean,
Well, yeah, it's still the government because they're in control. But I mean, even if you really look at it, the people that are occupying those positions in government are still ignorant.
Mm-hmm. We'll move from there to socialism. The simplest one is it's a stage of society in Marxist theory, as in Karl Marx, transitional between capitalism and communism, and distinguished by an unequal distribution of goods and pay according to work done. Meaning, no matter how hard you work, someone like me and also Byron, who are at the lower end, we've been working less time than most everyone else, would get paid less than someone who's been around more and has, say, a family and kids. So, where's our incentive to work harder?
See, for the most part, I do view socialism as basically a conduit to making people lazy because they don't have to work harder. And then the people that do work harder, they're not really getting anything for it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's kind of like, it's the little few cases where it's just like, I have found one or two little gems in socialism. It's kind of like, okay, if it's done, like, not if it's done well, but like that, a small section of like that utopian perfection, that it's plausible, it could work. But outside of that little block, it doesn't. It causes more problems than it does creating a better world.
Well, I'd say the true utopian world would be anarcho-capitalism.
I could probably agree with that, actually.
A little bit more on it. A system of society or group living where there is no private property. Problem with this is, as with any group of commons, is nobody respects it. If there is no private property, then it's a free-for-all. People take whatever they want. They do whatever they want. I mean, look at bathrooms in New York City. Go into a public restroom. It's not the prettiest place in the world. Why? Because no one owns it. But if you look, Reason recently did an article on I think it was the 10 best toilets in New York City. And Kennedy finished it by saying 3 flushes for capitalism. It's just
Wow.
basically all these places that were listed as having the best. Well, they didn't do the article. They were responding to an article that someone else did. But they didn't realize that what they were doing were showing the merits of capitalism. The fact that these were private bathrooms that were privately maintained and kept to this level of perfection so that they were quote unquote safe to use.
That
So
makes sense.
basically this group made an a list of why capitalism is good.
Because, like, I don't know, one of the things that I was looking at, and this was like the rare gem here, was like with socialism, I was looking at cars, actually, where it was like, I think Volvo is also Swedish too, so they might actually be included too. I'll have to look that up here. But like, I was looking at a comparison between something like, and this might lose a few people, so there is the internet if it helps, but I was looking at a comparison between something like the Hennessy Venom, which is a $1.2 million car, versus the Koenigsegg Agera R, which is also a $1.2 million car. And the difference being is like, they are somewhat two different concepts. They're both really insane and powerful cars, but the difference being you're paying 1.2 million for each of them. But the one that you get here in America, the Hennessy, it only costs $400,000 to build the car. As where the one you get from Sweden actually costs closer to $900,000 to build the car. You're getting more of your money's worth in the one in Sweden. But they're a socialist country, so, I don't really see, I doubt Christian von Koenigsegg is making massive wealthy riches. So I think he's going more for making an honest name for himself.
Well, I mean, making the best product you can and being competitive and maybe perhaps charging less for something can actually benefit you more because more people will want to buy the cheaper product.
Well, I guess in a way, cheaper would be the relative term here because,
Well, I'm
like,
not saying that it cheaper as in not as good. I'm saying cheaper as in inexpensive.
that's what I mean. I guess it would be a relative term here because it's like both cars are the same price. It's
Hmm.
just one is built to a much higher quality, which ironically is the one from the socialist country.
Well, you said Sweden.
Yes.
Sweden's an interesting country, though. I mean, at times I think they're more capitalist friendly, but at the same time they have socialism going on. So it's kind of hard to tell what's going on in that country.
Are they like moving towards socio-capitalists?
That is the weirdest thing I've ever heard.
But it's not completely impossible.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it isn't impossible, but I wouldn't say it's the best idea in the world.
Yeah, because the two pretty much contrast with each other, so I can understand that.
Again, socialism is a centrally planned economy in which the government controls means of production. So I would say that it's not entirely socialist, but it is more so than many other nations. Now, I don't know where they are in their socialist central planning, but that is kind of the direction that they're in. I don't know if they're going to continue down that line, but did you have something else to say on it?
No, not really.
Well, I want to jump back to an article by Thomas Sowell, which is entitled Socialist or Fascist. It's an article that he wrote on President Barack Obama, and it actually kind of goes into this kind of discussion that we're having over what do we have? Are we becoming more socialist or are we becoming more fascist? And he starts out. It bothers me a little when conservatives call Barack Obama a socialist. He certainly is an enemy of the free market and wants politicians and bureaucrats to make the fundamental decisions of the economy, but that does not mean that he wants government ownership of the means of production, which has long been a standard definition of socialism. What President Obama has been pushing for and moving toward is more insidious government control of the economy while leaving ownership in private hands. That way, politicians get to call the shots, but when their bright ideas lead to disaster, they can always blame those who own businesses in the private sector. Politically, it is a heads I win when things go right, and tails you lose when things go wrong. This is far more preferable from Obama's point of view, since it gives him a variety of scapegoats for all his failed policies without having to use President Bush as a scapegoat all the time. Now, these are Thomas Sowell's words. But basically, he goes on to talk about the fact that doing things this way, especially as it applies to the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, as media loves calling it now. Basically, if it fails, it's due to the greed of the capitalists, or if the insurance premiums go up, I should say. And this is a long-standing tradition in our government to blame capitalism for the failures of socialism or fascism even. All this central planning, all this control, and suddenly things don't go the way they wanted it to, and government goes, well, it's not our fault, it's the greedy capitalist's fault.
You know, in a way, I think Harry Houdini would be proud and dumbstruck at the same time.
I think he'd be like, how can you possibly top me? That's wow.
It's complete misdirection, and it doesn't seem like it should work. And somehow everyone is just, oh my God, it's the capitalist's fault.
And I'll read a little bit more here. One of the reasons why both pro-Obama and anti-Obama observers may be reluctant to see him as a fascist is that both tend to accept the prevailing notion that fascism is on the political right, wall, it is obvious that Obama is on the political left. Back in the 1920s, however, when fascism was a new political development, it was widely and correctly regarded as being on the political left. Jonah Goldberg's great book, Liberal Fascism, cites overwhelming evidence of the fascists' consistent pursuit of the goals of the left and of the left's embrace of fascists as one of their own during the 1920s. Mussolini, the originator of fascism, was lionized by the left, meaning shown to be great, both in Europe and America during the 1920s. Even Hitler, who adopted fascist ideas in the 1920s, was seen by some, including W.E.B. Du Bois, as a man of the left. What's interesting here is he doesn't really talk about it, but the Nazi Party is the National Socialist Party. They were socialist.
Yes, they were.
So it kind of follows what you were saying. I mean, it's socialism tends to take control, and whether it's communism or socialism, once the government has control, what happens then is who's ever quote unquote in charge slowly takes more and more power, and it becomes more fascist than anything else. Yeah, it's and it really looks like more of what we're looking at in this country is fascism, not socialism.
You can pretty much, in a way, compare it to a virus, where it starts out slow, but once it really starts, it'll just take off on you. Like, if you can't slow it down or stop it in some way at the beginning, it'll just take off, and then it's a completely new problem.
Yeah. Socialism, and we've talked about socialism, we've talked about fascism, and we've mentioned communism. Now, the thing that I want to talk about here with communism is communism was originally thought up by Karl Marx and some others. Well, Karl Marx, being the one who wrote the Communist Manifesto, he kind of laid out this idea that they were going to impose these high tariffs on businesses and rich people. Well, not necessarily rich. His word was bourgeoisie, which actually means middle class. And they were going to take the majority of their stuff, and then they were going to make things not owned by anyone. And if you ever read the Communist Manifesto, it is by far one of the worst written pieces of written work that I've ever read. And it really, he goes from saying that communists need to work in the open because they're not trying to harm anyone, and then at the end he's talking about workers of the world unite, because basically communism is a violent uprising. And if you read the Communist Manifesto, you start to realize that it's all in how you get there. Communism is intended to be a violent overthrow. It's the workers or the proletariat, the lower class, rising up, fighting back, taking back everything that they view as theirs from the bourgeoisie. Not the upper class, but the bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
And they take everything from them to, quote unquote, make everything fair again, which is part of the reason why the political right, the conservatives, the Republicans, talk about Obama being socialist, is because he has these ideas that he can take from someone else to give to someone else, and somehow that makes things more fair. But in practice, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
But yeah, that socialism and communism are essentially, and where I was going with this is Karl Marx was also a founder of the ideas of socialism, and his thought process was, instead of advocating a violent overthrow of the government, instead we slowly radicalize the government, we slowly change it, and we take control. And he has many books on his view of economics, and which later became the tenets of socialism. And it's basically the way Ayn Rand viewed it. Communism is a violent overthrow. Socialism is voted on. That's the only difference. They're the same systems essentially. It's just all in how it's implemented.
Pretty much. And, we can kind of see the same thing going on right now in the States here, where people are voting for more and more government control.
And that's
Although at the same
the
time,
interesting part. That's where we get to communism, socialism, and fascism are essentially the same systems, and how they can they can all end up being fascism because you put all the power in one spot. Because government, as it exists, tries to take or usurp more power from the people.
Exactly. And that's pretty much it. I mean, there it goes again. Runaway. It's just the difference is the people put it there. Or the people allowed it to be put there, I guess you could say.
And I would say that's very true and very much a part of how societies go. I mean, the Romans even got complacent and overextended themselves and fell apart. And I really think that if we don't change something quickly, we will end up being the Roman Empire.
So powerful yet so weak.
Yeah, we've overstepped ourselves and overstretched ourselves over the entire world, and we think we can tell other nations what to do. Kind of like we tell our citizens what they can and can't do, what they can and can't put in their bodies, whether or not certain people can get married or not. The amount of control that the government usurps and puts upon the people is kind of ridiculous. And people always talk about democracy is our protection from this. We vote on it. It's somehow this is the will of the people, and that's not entirely true, because democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what to eat for dinner. All right, so we'll segue into another similar topic that goes with all the communism, socialism, and fascism. It's authoritarianism. It's basically social organization characterized by submission to authority, as well as the administration of said authority. In politics, an authoritarian government is one in which the political authority is concentrated in a small group of politicians. It is usually opposed to individualism and libertarianism. This is from Wikipedia.
Not surprising.
Basically, authoritarianism is the centralized control, and that is where we're moving in this country. And people think they're voting to help themselves, but in the long run, all they're really doing is placing power in one spot. I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said, a government that has the power to give you everything you want also has the power to take it away.
Which is true, and you're basically allowing the government to play devil's advocate.
Explain.
They have the power to give and take away. I mean, you're basically handing over the power to them. In a way, you could say you're selling your soul to them, although I think that's pushing it to an extreme.
Well, you kind of are. I mean, that makes more sense to me than saying they're playing devil's advocate. I mean, devil's advocate would mean I'm taking the other side and kind of arguing the other way.
But don't they do that too? They try to play the game as if, we're really helping people, and let's wage this little battle between ourselves, between Republicans.
Oh, now you're talking about Republicans and Democrats and how they're essentially the same party.
But I mean, in a way, it all kind of goes together.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, does it matter which boot? Does it matter when a boot is at your throat, whether it's a right or a left?
particularly.
So we can kind of go from there and to capitalism. Now, capitalism kind of falls into this voluntarist kind of free state ideal. Free state project, go. If you don't know, the Free State Project is a pretty cool, almost anarchistic liberty project in New Hampshire that they're trying to gather, I think it was 20,000 people in the same area. And I talk to the guys on Free Talk Live from time to time, and they're very big into this. That's where they are. That's what they're doing. They're trying to bring liberty to this area. And I was like, I want to bring liberty to more people than just one area. I love what you guys are doing. I think that sounds like a great idea, but I want to try and do something to bring liberty to more people. And Mark, who's one of the co-hosts, actually told me that I sounded a lot like him at one point. I think his words were, I think I've used those exact words.
Oh, there you go.
So maybe I'll end up there anyways. Who knows?
Maybe.
But capitalism is an economic system characterized by private or corporate ownership of capital goods. Now, I take issue with corporate ownership because when it comes to private ownership, the idea of corporatism comes in when something takes complete control of the marketplace. And the only way that can happen is if you somehow limit other access to the market. So the only way you can have like corporate domination is through a government control of the marketplace. I mean, yes, somebody can create a really good product and take over this part of the marketplace, but it doesn't take long for someone else to create a good idea and to come in and create competition within that marketplace. Assuming that people still have the drive and the government hasn't kind of beat it out of them.
Yeah, that's the bigger thing.
So, private ownership of capital goods. I'm going to leave corporate out. By investments that are determined by private decision and by prices, production, and the distribution of goods that are determined mainly by competition in a free market. Now, when it comes to what we have today, I would say that we have this kind of corporatism. Liberals like to use the word plutocracy.
What does that even mean?
Well, it's here. I'll pull it up and give an exact definition so I don't sound too stupid.
And then get more liberals angry?
Plutocracy, meaning Pluto is from the Greek. Plutos meaning wealth, Kratos meaning power, dominion, or rule.
That explains a lot.
Is the rule by the wealthy. Now, the problem with this is that plutocracies only happen where government controls. If there's a government that allows them to take control, like if government, this is the whole we are the 99% thing, all that kind of annoys the crap out of me, because if government didn't have the power that it had, we wouldn't have as much, like business wouldn't be able to control our lives because they wouldn't be able to buy out these politicians like everybody claims. Basically, smaller government, so there's less control over people's lives, so business can't control people's lives. This idea that liberals kind of perpetuate that we need more government because business is in government doesn't make sense to me, because what happens? You get more government, business now controls more of government, which means they control more of your life. So we kind of need to go the opposite direction. We need to kind of separate business. In fact, I like the idea of a separation of business and state, much like we're supposed to have a separation of church and state. So basically, we just separate the two. You can't make laws over business, and business can't step in over government. I mean, part of the problem is we started controlling business, kind of like what we were talking about before with fascism, and how you still have private ownership, but government centrally plans and controls businesses and companies, and just controls the economy. So what you end up with when this all started happening, business now had to do something so that their voice would be heard. Because if government wasn't making laws that affected business, why would business even care about government? And this is what happens when you have government come in and say, you know, we don't like what you're doing, so we're going to tell you how you're supposed to do it. And now business has to fight back, and they have to send people to Washington or their state capitals to protect themselves from a government just trying to run their business.
Pretty much.
I mean, that's the thing about libertarians is we believe in this not only social freedoms, whether it's the right gay marriage rights or the right to put whatever I want into my body. Now, I'm going to caveat that with I have no desire to use drugs. I've never had a desire to use drugs. But if I wanted to, that's my business. Now, on the same token, when it comes to fast food, if I want to go to McDonald's and pay a quarter for a bucket of fries, isn't that on me? Isn't that between me and McDonald's?
It is.
Exactly. So
Now, the government is getting into all this stuff about what you can do with your body and all this stuff. And I know a lot of times now they're starting to take the side of, well, someone else cannot be a party to this. Because basically, like, I know there's a lot in the way of you can't do something because of medical confidentiality. Like, they can't necessarily ban it because then they're completely just defying their own rules and laws. With drugs, for example, you can say, oh, well, you shouldn't do drugs, but you can't say, well, like, I have a hard time saying.
well, you're saying you have trouble with, like, if you were to tell someone you can't do that, that doesn't make any sense to you. Versus if I were to say, I don't think you should. Friends and family get together and like try and stop someone from doing drugs. That's all right because they have a vested interest.
And see,
When something starts to affect a person to a point where it's harming not just themselves but other people within their family, versus if I didn't know you and I came to you and I said you can't do that. I mean, who am I to tell you what you can and can't do?
that is pretty much exactly what I'm trying to say.
Although Ann Coulter doesn't agree.
Ooh, okay.
You didn't watch the video, so she had choice words for libertarians because apparently we focus on piddly little issues to try and bring liberals into our fold versus actually standing on principles. And I think this is one of the reasons why I like libertarians, is because we stand up for what we believe in. We don't play games. What we believe in is government out of people's lives across the board. We truly believe that government should get out of people's lives.
But see, again, that comes to like what I was dealing with earlier, which is principles are basically what? People's morals, and morals are subjective.
Well, I mean, as long as you aren't hurting someone.
But that's the thing. As long as you aren't hurting someone,
Or stealing from them. I mean,
what's the issue? And the thing is like you're enforcing these morals at the cost of someone else's freedom, especially if they're not violating someone else.
yeah. I mean, if we're not harming someone else, if you go out and do something that harms you but doesn't affect me, who am I to impose my moral will on you?
And that's what really irritates me with the whole morality high horse, because they always want to push it on you, even though I'm not hurting anyone else. It's not like I'm going out killing people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing something for my entertainment. I'm not doing it to the extreme of, oh, well, it's hurting all these people around me or something, be it, physically or emotionally. It's just kind of like, okay, I'm having a little fun, what have you. But they'll just take it and completely blow it out of proportion or something. And now I can't do that because it's immoral.
All right, so there's our little rant on leaving people alone, which
Yes, and leave people alone.
actually would be great for capitalism. I mean, if people leaving other people alone and allowing them to spend or not spend their money at will is is great for everyone around them. It doesn't harm anyone else. But when you start to look at like the drug war and what it has cost us as a nation and how many people are in prison for crimes that affected no one, that had no effect on anyone else's lives.
They
And
got
that drain on the economy is is far worse.
How many people are locked up in jail because they were sitting at home watching cartoons, smoking weed?
Well, I don't have the statistics on me, but I want to say over three-quarters of our prison system is populated by people who had no effect on anyone else's lives. Nonviolent offenders.
That's just silly.
That's why this motto has come about: no victim, no crime. If there's no victim, there's no crime.
Well, I think some cops would disagree with you because,
Cops would disagree with me on a lot.
that's true too. But in a way, I'd be very entertained by that because it's like you take me for example. I drive way too fast sometimes. So if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and there's no one else on the road other than the cop who's just waiting for a speeder, if there's no victim, does that mean there's no crime? And therefore, even though I was driving at 130 miles an hour, I don't have to have a ticket?
Well, I mean, you could debate both sides of that. I mean, if there was someone else on the road, even if you didn't get to them at that point, I mean, you could theoretically be putting someone else's life in danger. But I think that argument is a little contrite because if you're not weaving or doing anything insanely crazy, I think what's more dangerous is someone who's going slow in the passing lane. But we're okay with that. There's usually no repercussion for someone going slow in the passing or fast lane.
And yet, you know, we have this fear of speed and, ooh, you're going fast, so,
Well, that's like
yeah.
that news report. Texas won. I don't know if they did or not, but they wanted to increase the speed limit to 85 on a stretch of road in the middle of nowhere. And what do California newscasters do? Their top news story of the night: how fast is too fast? It's like, okay, now you're generating an opinion within your audience.
Pretty
That's
much,
not
not to
reporting.
mention demonizing
Yeah.
something different. And it's like, if it's out in the middle of nowhere and there's not a lot of cars that drive it, I mean, what is the point of, what's the big worry?
Yeah.
Okay, you might have a couple of street racers or some speed freaks who might come from different parts of the world because it's kind of like, well, if we're going a little bit faster than the speed limit, it's not like anyone's really going to notice or be able to keep up to give us a ticket.
If you want to talk about cops, I mean, how about cops who don't even follow the laws? How is it right that in California we can't talk on a cell phone or text, but cops can? Like somehow they're 1,000 times better driver than any of the rest of us.
Yeah, that's total hypocrisy. And I mean, like,
I was sitting at a stoplight Thursday night waiting for it to change, and a sheriff's deputy turns left in front of me, and she's on her cell phone.
see, it's not just that kind of thing that irritates me, though, because, like, I seen that plenty today when I was on the way to San Jose. But something else I seen while I was in San Jose, I don't know if San Jose has, like, an anti-vagrants law or something, but there was a bum riding his bike. He's got aluminum helmet that looks like he's trying to keep the aliens out of his head or something. But at the same time, on that helmet, he's also got a camera. And the cops, I seen them pull up to him, and they got out of the car, they started talking to him, and then I noticed that the cops started to take an interest in the helmet, and then he asked him to, like, remove the camera, and it's just like, okay.
No, I would have walked over with a camera and recorded them because cops have no right to do stuff like that. This idea that they're somehow above the law and they need privacy to do their work. Yeah, okay, but there needs to be some level of protection for myself.
Well, what level of privacy do they need to do their work? I mean, if you're an undercover cop, okay, I can understand that, but just like if you're on the beat. Okay.
Well, anytime that you are openly dealing with an individual, and I know you're a cop, I have every right to protect myself from you. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to do anything, but if you're not going to do anything that harms what you and your position or the police force, then why on earth would you have a problem with someone recording what you're doing?
Pretty much. And I don't know, it feels like they're trying to cover their hind ends.
Yeah. An interesting side note, I reposted something that the Libertarian Party on Facebook posted earlier today, that the title of the video was "Don't Speak to Cops." Basically, this was a criminal defense lawyer professor giving a class to potential lawyers, and he was basically teaching them, don't speak to cops. Use your Fifth Amendment rights, because no matter what you say and do can be used against you. Cannot be used for your benefit, but it can be used against you. And even the cop who followed up after him, he was like, he could disagree with everything I say and tell you something different. The cop got up there and said, yeah, don't talk to cops. Because cops are human too. I mean, assuming that they're not trying to go out of their way to harm you, they can misremember things too. They can, mess something up. And once it's their word against yours, they have a monopoly. They're going to win.
Pretty much.
And I don't necessarily like that mentality that they're automatically right. And that's how we end up with the problems we have within the police forces nationwide. This isn't like localized problems, like, oh, there's problems in the LAPD, oh, there's problems in the New York Police Department, there's problems in the Chicago Police Department. I could go on for days listing where problems occur. This is not a localized problem. We have nationwide problems with our police forces.
Corruption is everywhere, man.
So, capitalism, to kind of come back, is it's simply a voluntary system that people come together and voluntarily exchange value for value. So when people complain that they're not getting paid enough, what I think people need to do is step back. And if they aren't going to get what they want from their boss, but they think they're worth it, maybe they should go elsewhere. I think when you use unions and government together to force an employer to pay people more, people as a whole, not an individual, because if I deserve to make more money as an individual, I'm a harder worker. Well, due to some audio difficulties, we will have to wrap up this episode of The Third Perspective. I'm your host, Rob, and I'd like to thank Byron for coming along again tonight as the liberal libertarian. Thank you and good morning.